What kind of athlete am I? So I've done a number of sports, and I've done a number of sports in a competitive context, including competitions and races, official ones and stuff like that, and unofficial ones, and on my own and stuff like that. Broad range of things. And so I'm going to break this into two kind of categories that I've come to recognize both about myself and athletes in general. And so I'm going to break athletes into two categories. The first one is the sprinter category. Sprinters. And the second one is endurance. And so I was a water baby, meaning I was in water since practically the day I was born, literally. Like, some of those classes start as early as infants, water classes. So I was a water baby. So swimming is a big sport for me. As I've started running as I was about 13 years old, but I did soccer, so there was running in that sense. And then I've done some of the other ones are like boxing, fencing, rugby. Those are the ones that I'm going to kind of talk about a little bit in kind of trying to communicate what kind of an athlete I am. So in the sprinter category, there's kind of short sprints, there's mid, and I'm just going to leave this mid, and then long. So like middle, I suppose we can finish that. And then endurance, there's also short, middle, and long. And I'm a little bit of both. I'm naturally talented at some things, and other things are just very hard for me. I can do all of these things. I have done all of these things. So I talked about some of the sports, or mentioned some of the sports I've done. So I'll start with a swimming kind of analogy or understanding, because I've done this. So short distances would be sprints that are, I'm going to use yards instead of meters, because I'm just going to stick with one unit here. And so short distance sprints would be 25 to 50 yards. Middle distance sprints would be 100 yards, and long distance sprints would be 200 yards. Short distance endurance would be 500 yards. Middle distance endurance would be 1,000 yards to a mile long races, and then long distance would be multiple miles in open water. And I have done every single type and distance that I just mentioned. And my fortes for swimming correspond to other sports I have done as well. And so I'm going to circle the ones where I'm going to start with two that I would say I am naturally talented at. I'll explain what I mean by that. So I'm naturally talented at middle endurance lengths and short sprints. And so by natural talent, I mean, I don't need to train. I can hop in a pool with people who've been training year-round for a sport and beat them in a race with 2 weeks of practice. And it pisses those people who train all the time off. And so that's what I mean by natural talent. And I can be thrown in a race for the first time and not have that practice background. People who I have found or seen who practice year-round, years on end, and in the same sport. Some aren't, but a lot of the time they can do other races because the practice they do prepares them for kind of any race, versus I won't train for 10 months and then I'll jump in a pool and I can just kind of beat some of those people who've been training year-round, and it'll be my first time in a race. And so that's what I mean by naturally talented, is practice is not imperative, even if it's endurance. It's just something you can kind of get up and do. I think everybody is naturally talented in some category here. I have found, whether you've found the right sport and avenue to let your athleticism out, everybody is an athlete in some way. Don't laugh. If you're laughing, don't laugh. You are. It's just finding the right sport. Finding the right sport can be the hardest part. And so these two I'm naturally talented at. And the other one that I would say I'm good at and perhaps naturally talented at, but it's not the natural talent, isn't maybe as pronounced, is here. And that's short endurance. That I can, I guess actually I am naturally talented at that because I spent a few years of my life running, and I could run a mile in under 5 minutes, which I'm a female, I'm a woman, that's really fast, especially for only a few years of training. Like, people can work decades or over a decade and never achieve that. And I think I'd spent about 6 years at that point in my life running, and I ran, it was a 4-minute and 56-second mile, just for fun. And it was it was raining. I'm from Seattle, so like running in the rain is like when I do my best, and oddly enough. And it was rainy and windy, and I was in Africa, and it felt like home. Like, it reminded me of Seattle, and so I just went, whew, I was like, whoa. So I am naturally talented, just maybe not in a swimming context. In a running context, this is definitely my forte, as is short distance sprinting. So I can do this long distance stuff, but I'm also not. I'll stick with running, and then I'll go to the other 3 or 4 sports I mentioned. For running long endurance, I would be like, there are people who get up, and I didn't encounter, it's not as big in the United States of America. In Africa, it was a big thing, is races that are a couple 100 miles, or at least 100 miles long running. Which, like, no. Like, I love running, and I'm a runner, but I would say a good maximum for me, like a typical running range when I'm in shape, might be 4 to 12 miles. That's kind of I just like to run that distance. It feels good, and especially with like good music and stuff. 100 miles, just no, and I would get so bored. So running is my sport in certain contexts. One of the contexts that running and the short sprinter in me comes out in running is in running, in soccer, and actually in rugby, fencing, and water polo. Rugby, fencing, water polo, and soccer. And so I was a defender, and there are people on the team, on a soccer team, who are going to be the fastest runners in like 100-yard dash. And those are typically the forwards on a team, and they might get the best times. The defenders might also get the best times, but on the field, defenders, speaking from experience, there was a girl who was like the fastest in the school, or second fastest in the school at sprinting on like the track and field team, and she was a forward for a different team, and I could catch her as a defender. And so it's kind of sprinting is more of like a motivational thing when it's in a team sport setting like soccer. So you can have those people who are like without a ball, like you're both sprinting down the field, and if a defender can catch them, they're like faster than the forward from the other team. So I would say I am naturally good at this, though in a sprinting for running. In swimming, I'm just naturally good at it. Sprinting for running, it's slightly, if I'm just feeling it, or if it's context dependent. And then the other 3 things where this comes out for me is water polo, rugby, and fencing. All 3, rugby, water polo, fencing, and boxing. Those are sports, those 4, I'm just going to leave it at that, that require extreme pulses and displays of intense energy for a very short amount of time. And whether you can actually channel that energy or not is like game changing, match changing, whatever sport you're playing, whatever phrase you want to use. And so a play or a sprint down the pool might be the determining factor on if a goal is made or not and who wins a game and stuff like that, or who wins a boxing match or a fencing match. If you don't have the energy for short pulses, you might not make it, period. Though with, let's see if I can remember the four: rugby, fencing, boxing, and water polo. So rugby, I was a weak side flanker, and this is a perfect position in sport to tie this one back to the endurance. So I was a weak side flanker in rugby, and flankers in rugby, as I had it phrased to me during training, is in like practices and stuff, is it is my responsibility as a flanker. The flankers should be making at least 50% of the tackles in every single rugby game. So we had to get up and we had to be tackling other people. It's not like football where the game stops. We keep going. So it's like tackle after tackle after tackle. And each of those tackles requires short, intense pulses of energy where I needed to be tackling someone else, pushing them over a ball, like stuff like that. And then it's not over. I have to keep going and I don't get a break. And so that's where the short sprinting comes back into endurance. If someone's running like 100-yard dash or 100-meter dash in track and field, and that's the race and that's it, that's a short sprinter. But there's also contexts where you have to be able to do that repeatedly. It's not just one race and you're done until the next time the Olympics comes around, something like that. Like you might be doing that in 5 seconds later, like, and you might be doing that, 50 times in a game or 100 times in a game. And so that's where sports, I think, like rugby and boxing, my natural talent areas enable me to do these sports where it just feels right and it feels comfortable. And because I can take my short and middle endurance, and I can pair it with my short sprinter to make it possible for me to have the energy to last a match or last a game, being in the whole game. We didn't have many flankers on my team, so I was expected to play a lot as flanker in rugby. And so stuff like that. And yeah, I can do middle and long sprinting, but, and there's a big but, I have to train in one of these two categories. I have to train for middle or short distance to be good at middle or long distance sprinting. So I can do it just like I can do the long distance stuff, long distance endurance. It's not as appealing to me, so that's why I don't really do it. This stuff, it depends on what the middle distance race is. I can actually be very good at this. It's just, yeah, at least at this point in my time in my life, I would not necessarily call myself naturally talented at it. I don't know. Maybe I just haven't found my sport for middle and long distance sprinting or long endurance. I think if you are an athlete, cool, good for you. Maybe your experiences, you have a different way of putting this kind of scheme together as to what you can do and what you can't do, or what you do better than other things. And then if you're not an athlete, I would say, well, you just haven't found your sport yet. And that might sound cliche or be a cliche, but a lot of what you can do is the coach and what feels right to you. So if you have a great coach, but your heart of heart is like, croquet is not my sport, or cricket, yeah, or cricket is not my sport, or something more mainstream, basketball. Like you might be really good at it, and the coaches might tell you you're really good at it, but you have to force yourself and you don't enjoy it, and so you don't do it. and you don't think of yourself as an athlete because you don't enjoy it, there's a sport out there for you. Maybe it's just not a sport yet. That's also a possibility. So everybody's an athlete in some way, whether or not we have found the sport that's right. Or sports. There might be multiple sports. So like I found boxing and fencing are kind of my homes. They're kind of similar in format, and that they're short pulses of energy, but then you have to do that in multiple rounds kind of thing. So yeah, so that and that pulls on these 3 areas that I'm naturally talented at, and so maybe that's part of why I feel like they're a home for me. So good luck in your athletic pursuits.